We're just seeing a lot of the lines disappear because all of these wallets are becoming very multi-purpose, which is really great for their engagement, but it also ramps up competitive challenges for everyone because you want to stand out.
Hey gang, it's Tuesday, June 21st. Jaime, Adriana, and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily and eMarketer podcast made possible by Marketing Architects. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by two people. We meet them now. First of all, we have Jaime Toplin, who's one of our senior analysts on the payments team.
Hey, Marcus.
Hello, Jaime. Thank you for hanging out. We're also joined by research analyst Adriana Nunez, who also covers payments.
Hey.
Hello there. Today's fact, before we get started, a special type of firefly lights blue instead of white. Do they light white? It's like more like an orange, isn't it?
I feel like it's usually like yellowish.
Yeah. All right. I don't love this article already, but it's kind of cool still. So if you happen to be in the southern Appalachians, you might be able to catch a glimpse of a ghost firefly. Oh, and you'll know it because you will see it will glow a unique blue-green shade instead of the what we've now decided is more of an orange kind of glow. I think fireflies might be the coolest thing ever. You call them something different? Something
No,
lightning bugs?
Sometimes lightning bugs, but kind of interchangeable.
Sometimes. When you're mad with them? Is that like Yeah, I saw one the other day. But I saw one the other day. Just one. And I feel like if you see one, it feels like it's lost, you know? Or maybe it's just not talking to its friends. It seems weird to just see one. It was still beautiful. Who cares? Anyway, today's real topic. Who's winning the P2p Payments race and what's holding it back? Zelle is a service that lets you send money between almost any US bank account. It was the major American bank's response to Venmo. US senators recently sent a letter to those major banks, including JP Morgan and Bank of America, who collectively own Zelle through a separate company, to ask for clarity on how the P2P app handles fraud after multiple reports of Zelle fraud cases. Adriana, you just put out a piece on this. We're talking P2p payments, but we're starting with Zelle because of this recent news. What's going on in this story and why does it matter?
Right. So Zelle has come under fire because there's been multiple reports of just a lot of fraud occurring on its platform. This is occurring amid a lot of media coverage on that. For instance, there was a New York Times article from March in which a bunch of Zelle fraud victims were interviewed and discussed how they lost anywhere from several hundred to several thousands of dollars. So it's obviously a big issue that's getting increasing media coverage. And I think something big worth noting with Zelle is that it's operated by a company called Early Warning Services. And Early Warning Services is owned... It is, right?
What were they thinking?
And Early Warning Services is owned by 7 of the largest U.S. banks, including Bank of America and JP Morgan. So I think it's worth highlighting that this isn't some small fintech that's struggling with fraud. This is a major, robust banking platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jaime, what's your take on the situation?
Yeah, before we get into the nitty gritty and the details, I think it's really important to note that Zelle is kind of under fire right now, in part because of its large reach, which we'll get to. But P2P fraud is something that's really on the rise broadly. Javelin found that nearly 18 million customers experienced this in 2020. ITA just put out a study that like a quarter of customers who experienced account takeover fraud experienced it through a P2P platform, and satisfaction with the response was pretty low. So this is something that's really endemic to the industry. It's not a Zelle-specific problem. It's something that's coming amid decreasing tolerance for fraud, backlash, and concern. And so that's kind of the backdrop against which the temperature is being turned up here. But that led to, in April, Senators Warren and Menendez from Massachusetts and New Jersey sent Early Warning a letter asking for clarity on a couple things related to Zelle. They wanted to know about fraud prevention, mitigation, and refunds. They wanted to know about relationships with its partner banks regarding reimbursement for fraud victims. It wanted to know how regulatory policy might apply to these fraud cases. And they wanted information about the number and the dollar value of cases and if they're being reported to authorities and how they're being dealt with. This is being really compounded by the CFPB. Rohit Chopra, who's the head of the CFPB, said he's aware and highly attuned to these issues on P2P platforms. This comes as the CFPB is pretty active. So it's likely we're going to see a closer look at really who's responsible for this fraud. A lot of it falls into human error. People kind of get scammed. It's not like people are hacking the platforms. It's that people are falling victim to scammers and to malicious actors, which makes the response complicated. But there's also legal action that's coming. Our class action lawsuit against Wells Fargo is kind of coming down the pike. Customer was wrongly debited by a scammer pretending to be from Wells Fargo. They want to add other people to this. And so there's just a lot of signs that there's going to be something ranging from more exploration to more action going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Rohit Chopra, the CFPB, that is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You mentioned earlier that this is a big deal for a number of reasons, but one of them is because of Zelle's broad reach. How big is Zelle? How many people are using this service?
So I guess before we talk about how many people are using this service, I think to understand the P2P industry, we need to take a really wide angle view because it's not that uncommon for customers to use multiple apps in different ways. So it's really frequent that someone might use Zelle for a high value, lower frequency transaction like a rent payment or a utility bill splitting, whereas you might use Venmo for smaller dollar transactions, but on a more regular basis, like splitting a restaurant bill with friends. And so when we're looking at these user numbers, it's important to keep in mind that there is overlap. People don't necessarily fit into one discrete category of product.
Okay. So different services for different things. And I guess that's just developed organically, has it? Or they've been promoting themselves for these specific purposes?
I would say a mix of both, but we'll get into that a little bit more in a second.
Okay. So yeah, Zelle, how many people are using it?
According to insider intelligence forecasts, Zelle's expected to reach 62 million users this year in the United States. And that's about 7.5 million more than last year in 2021.
Okay.
And the platform is expected to process $531 billion in volume. So it's pretty huge.
Wow.
I know.
$500 billion. Okay.
Yep. In February, it said that it worked with 10,000 financial institutions. So again, that kind of puts some perspective in terms of how big Zelle is.
Yeah. Okay, 62 million. And I believe that's pretty much doubled from a few years ago, right? From 2018. So if you're unfamiliar with Zelle a few years ago and now you're hearing us tell you it's a really big deal, don't worry, you're not alone. It wasn't that huge of a deal. 28 million is not a drop in the bucket, but 62 million is significant. I mean, basically looking at like a fifth of the US population, maybe a quarter plus a third of the adult population. But Jaime, it's not the biggest platform by users, at least in terms of P2P services.
That is true. Venmo is the biggest platform in terms of users in this country. So Venmo is owned by PayPal. They're going to hit around 77.7 million active users this year. That's about the same amount over last year as Zelle in terms of full users. And they're going to process $282.44 billion this year. And then we also have Cash App. They're kind of the third player in the space. They're a lot smaller, though. Cash App's going to hit 47.8 million users this year with $116.14 billion in volume. They're owned by Block, which is the parent company of Square. And they're continuing to build out their network, doing a lot of cool work on features, but they're really like a smaller player in the space. And PayPal also sits in this group. But going back to Zelle, since that's what we were talking about quickly. So Zelle, like we said, is the second largest by users, but it's the biggest in terms of volume, and that's really reflective of its reach. We've talked a lot already about how the app is bank-based. It's available to over 100 million consumers, over 1,000 banks. That creates a lot of accessibility, a lot of trust, especially among older customers who want to use a service through their bank, and they're continuing to really market themselves, explore new use cases to drive growth.
Okay, seems to be working, but Venmo, as we said, they're the largest at the moment in terms of users, 78 million. Zelle in second place with 62, Cash App with 50. So yeah, Venmo, which is the largest, 28% of Americans using Venmo. In terms of volume, as we mentioned, Zelle, about $500 billion in transaction volume in the US this year, according to our forecasting team, about half as much, about $250 billion, just over for Venmo, and then about 100 million, even less than that for Cash App. And going forward, is Venmo catching up? Is Zelle going to hold on to its lead? Does Cash App dash into first place?
So Zelle and its competitors, despite everything, are expected to see major growth in the coming years as consumers continue to rely less on cash and look for more digital ways to transact. So looking ahead, Zelle is expected to add almost 21 million users between 2022 and 2026. In the same 4-year span, Venmo will add nearly 25 million users and Cash App will bring in 15 million users.
Okay, so Zelle's going to add over 20 million users, not enough to catch up though. Venmo adding as well, so Venmo stays out in front. By users, Zelle second, Cash App still in third. Let's roll that up to look at how many Americans are using P2p apps overall, and also how much are they transacting on them.
So mobile P2P in this country is really, really mature. It's something that's already extremely popular. It counts nearly 150 million users. That's over 60% of people with smartphones. It's something that is really permeated sort of the zeitgeist and the culture, especially among younger people in this country, which we'll come back to. And people are really transferring a lot of money through these apps. They're seeing over $1 trillion in volume. That's this year. And to put that in context, that's really about the same that people are spending shopping online. So that's a pretty big amount of money.
That's a good comparison.
And that's really on the backs of major growth during the pandemic when people didn't want to touch cash. They weren't necessarily seeing people. Before the pandemic, 11% of overall P2P transactions were made via mobile apps. Last year, it hit 29% and it continues to inch up. So really, really catalyzed growth in that space.
Okay. So 150 million users this year. Where's that going by 2026?
By 2026, that is going to go to 180.2 million users. So over 7 in 10 smartphone users. So growth is starting to slow because the market is getting really, really mature. But even incremental user growth is going to really catalyze spending. It's going to exceed like $2.25 trillion in 2026. So even adding just a few users, the combination of that and a shift towards mobile is going to just absolutely skyrocket growth. It's like a rocket ship up.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about where this is all going. Let's say, what does the state of P2p payments look like in 4 years, at the end of our forecast period, which is convenient for this question. But in 2026, if I'm looking around at folks and using P2p payments, what do I notice? What's different about P2p payments in 2026?
So really the biggest thing is that growth in P2p payments is reflective of a shift that we're seeing in broader society, which is a movement away from physical currency. Customers don't like cash. They don't like checks anymore. And in store, that's manifesting.
Anymore? I didn't even know checks were a thing until I came to the States. What is happening?
So in store, that's really showing up as a move towards credit cards, towards debit cards, towards buy now, pay later and other apps. But for P2P transfers, which are really cash heavy, volume's going to shift towards apps. That's going to be a huge feeder. It's just organic growth from cultural shifts that are going on. And the entrance of new categories coming online is going to only make that further. So being able to get disbursements like an insurance refund or a claim through your P2P app, being able to pay and split bills, potentially using your P2P app, etc. Growth in those areas will only further this shift.
Question for you. Venmo doesn't talk to Zelle, does it?
It does not.
Okay.
So that's actually a really huge part of P2P growth is what we like to call network effect. Or the way that I like to explain it is that it doesn't really matter how many people are using an app as long as your people are using it. So like everyone in the country could be using Zelle except for one person. But if that one person wants to send you money, then you're going to have to either join their app or they're going to have to join yours or else the transaction fails. And so that's another part of the reason why people often will use multiple.
Okay. What else? What else is going to change over the next 4 years in P2P payments?
I actually wanted to jump in, like for Zelle specifically, I think growth will also depend a lot on adoption of mobile banking apps like Bank of America, that sort of thing. Like people adopting those type of apps is really going to help drive growth for Zelle because it's embedded in that. They do have their own standalone app. It's also embedded within these banking apps. So as more people start using it, that's more exposure for Zelle. And it's going back to Jaime's like network effect.
Yeah. From a user experience perspective, is either of them kind of that different from one another? Can you do a lot more in one versus the other? Is one more user-friendly than the other?
They all have really different strengths and weaknesses. So Zelle, because it's in your banking app, it's extremely convenient. It's in a service that tons of people already use and engage with on a regular basis. But it also is really focused on P2P. A lot of people see it as sort of an add-on to their bank rather than a standalone service. They're sort of just starting to move into small businesses. very, very early conversations are being rumored about maybe using it for shopping and for in-store, whereas Venmo has a much more built-out ecosystem. They do transfers, but you can also pay with Venmo online or in-store. They have ties with cryptos. They have some limited banking features like a debit card or a credit card. So they sort of serve different purposes and exist in different universes, which is also why people tend to use more than one service. But those new services are really important because they help get people on board who weren't there before. Maybe they'll convince someone who doesn't necessarily want to make P2p payments to join, and then they'll either start engaging in P2p payments or they'll start using what we like to call monetized services. So shopping, which generates fees, transferring money back to their bank account, which generates fees, and then they can reinvest those and approach profitability. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is Zelle, is the branding of it still confusing people? Because in the beginning, it was this service that lots of banks used, but it was, to your point, like hidden or kind of tucked away inside these different banks' apps, whereas Venmo has become a verb. So is Zelle, I've never heard anyone say, oh yeah, do you have Zelle? Maybe that's just the circle that I'm in, the demographic. Clearly Zelle's pretty big. There's a lot of people using it. But is it struggling with branding issues, awareness issues?
I think less so than ever before. They've invested a ton in marketing. I see ads for it everywhere I go in the city. Yeah. And I think it's really working, especially for payments that require a high level of trust.
Okay.
If you look at, let's say, like a rent payment where you're doing it every month and it's a huge amount of money and you want to make sure that that's received immediately in real time, which is included in Zelle, it's a really great option for you. And I think that they're continuing to like really make inroads there. Also very popular among people who might have been hesitant to use P2P before because they were nervous because it's connected to their bank. It feels really secure, really safe. And that actually kind of takes us back to the fraud angle that we were talking about before, because preventing that is really key or they're going to lose that edge.
Yeah. Yeah, despite the financial crash in 2008, banks are still some of the most trusted institutions. Yep. And so they do benefit from that association. Anything else that's going to be changing the space up in the next 4 years?
I want to just go back to the fraud point really quickly because we talked a lot about how it's a threat, but it also presents an opportunity because there's a way to introduce new tools that make these transactions safer, take steps out of the process. Early warning, Zelle's parent company is experimenting with a number of different tools. They launched one called Authentify to really help verify transactions, verify credentials to try to preempt that fraud before it comes. And there's also an opportunity for marketing because you can educate consumers, you can launch marketing campaigns. Zelle has been doing this too, but really all of them are doing it to some degree about how to prevent fraud. And at the same time, that can help with your branding because it's putting your name in front of customers and saying, we're showing you how to do this safely.
Right, right. And finally, Jaime, so when we were talking about this in the last couple of days preparing for the show, I was trying to figure out, P2p payments, that's paying people, proximity payments, that's paying things at a terminal. And you were explaining to me that the way that we look at those two different ways of paying is going to change over the next couple of years.
Yes, definitely. I think those value-added features that I was talking about, like shopping, we're going to see a lot of coalescence. People can use Venmo, for example, to pay a peer, but they can also use it to pay with a QR code in store or to hit a checkout button online. So that's adding new use cases. They're all kind of doubling down on small businesses, which is leading to new use cases. And so we're just seeing a lot of the lines disappear because all of these wallets are becoming very multi-purpose, which is really great for their engagement, but it also ramps up competitive challenges for everyone because you want to stand out.
Right. So P2p payments in 2026, a quick snapshot, 22% of Americans using Cash App, according to our forecasts, 29%, even more, of Americans using Zelle, 36% using Venmo. So that's still the leader by users, at least. Over 70% of smartphone users will use P2P services. As Jaime pointed out, that's 180 million Americans. And by age, also fascinating, over 75% of people 57 and younger, so that's Gen Z, Millennial, and Gen X, 75% of those three generations, 57 and younger, will be using P2P services. Half of people 58 and older. So a lot of people in the boomer category. That's all we've got time for the lead. It's time now for the halftime report. Jaime, we'll start with you. What's your one takeaway from the first half?
I think the really big takeaway is that as these apps become more popular and they become more integrated into consumers' lives, providers need to work to amp up trust. And part of that falls onto fraud prevention, but there's also opportunity to add features, create value, build relationships, and that's going to generate lifetime increases that make a real difference in business.
Adriana, you're up. Your takeaway?
Yeah, sort of similar to what Jaime was saying. As consumers adopt digital payments and let go of cash, apps like Venmo and Zelle, Cash App, all of those apps will become more important and prevalent. So in the coming years, 180 million US users will use P2p apps. That's about 70% of smartphone users.
Yeah, lots of folks, more than half the population, so they are definitely here and here to stay. That's all we've got time for the lead. Time now for In Other News, but first a quick word from our sponsor, Marketing Architects. TV advertising is a powerful channel for growth, but the traditional process for launching TV campaigns is expensive and complex. That's why Marketing Architects changed it. With all-inclusive TV advertising, they invest their own money. That's right, their own money to produce, analyze, and optimize your campaign. All you pay for is media, setting you up for rapid growth at an extreme cost advantage. This approach is so revolutionary, they wrote a book about it. Go to marketingarchitects.com/book to get your free copy today. Click the blue button, you get a free book. Right, folks, we are back today in other news. What to make of the current and continuing cryptocurrency crash, and how much of a splash can Apple's buy now, pay later service make? Okay, here we go. Story one. Total cryptocurrency market cap was close to $3 trillion US in November of last year. 6 months later, it is 1/3 the size of what it was at below $1 trillion, according to CoinMarketCap. That's a loss of $2 trillion, or as our head of finance, Dan Van Dyke, puts it, it's like the value of a company the size of Apple simply disappearing in half a year. That's kind of what's happened in terms of cryptocurrency market cap. Bitcoin is down 56% from its peak in November. Ethereum is down over 60%. I'm sure those numbers have changed in the last few seconds, so don't quote me. But Adriana, the current state of the cryptocurrency crash is blank.
It's really bad. Really bad.
That's a fair assessment. How come?
Well, I mean, as you just mentioned, the market cap has just decreased so much. The crypto market lost $2 trillion since November, and $1 trillion of that occurred just in the last 2 months. So that's pretty big. Wow. Yeah, a huge decline. And of course, this has really hampered business for crypto exchanges, with some halting withdrawals, Coinbase having to, unfortunately, cut 20% of its workforce.
Yeah.
But zooming out a little, I think how we got here has a lot to do with widespread economic uncertainty. Crypto, especially Bitcoin, was supposed to be a hedge against inflation, according to big crypto supporters like Jack Dorsey and others. That hasn't really played out. The Fed's efforts to curb inflation with higher interest rates has made cryptos and other risk-prone stocks less appealing. So while there are several implications for the current crypto market crash, I think one of the biggest is overall less trust in digital currencies among consumers. And ultimately, I think what's going to happen is that it could be a market reckoning that sorts out the winners and the losers in the crypto space.
Jaime, in your opinion, the current state of the cryptocurrency crash is blank.
I think it's really challenging. So to take a payment-specific angle, payments firms have been really doubling down on cryptos. PayPal, for example, added checkout with cryptos. They recently have improved transfer functionality. Shopify and other providers are experimenting with letting their sellers accept cryptos, and that comes against rising ownership and then rising share of users who want to pay with cryptos. 11% of owners are interested in doing that, and we forecast will this year. And 85% of US organizations are prioritizing offering crypto payments. So a huge market crash could force these guys to completely have to rethink that strategy.
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting note from Peter Kafka of Recode pointing out that download rankings for crypto trading apps, they've stayed pretty level. Pretty much all of them, according to data.ai, which is surprising. Maybe it says something about the space. Story 2. Apple is planning its own buy now, pay later service as part of its new iOS 16, notes the BBC. Apple Pay Later, as it's called, lets US users spread the cost of a purchase into 4 payments over 6 weeks without paying interest or fees. Adriana, the impact Apple Pay Later will have on the buy now, pay later space will be blank.
It'll be huge.
Oh,
it'll be huge, yeah. It'll definitely shake up this space. This is because Apple Pay Later will have two major benefits over BNPL incumbents like Klarna and Afterpay and others. The first thing is Apple can rely on strong customer loyalty and its massive base of Apple Pay users, which this year we expect will reach 45.4 million. So it'll really start off with a strong addressable market. The second point is Apple has really strong merchant acceptance, both online and in store. In 2019, Apple was accepted at 74 of the top 100 retailers in the US. But that's probably a lot bigger now because that's the latest data I could find. Mm-hmm. But when you combine these factors with overall BNPL demand, this is Apple Pay Later's recipe for success, in my opinion.
And Jaime, the impact Apple Pay Later will have on the buy now, pay later space for you will be blank.
It's going to be a huge growth engine, I think. Looking at Apple specifically, Adriana talked a lot about Apple, the way that Apple Pay Later is going to impact the BNPL space, but it's also a growth driver for Apple and its own financial services ambitions. Apple's been trying to push Apple Pay beyond just in-store and online payments. This really started in 2019 when it launched Apple Card, its credit card in partnership with Goldman Sachs, which ramps up rewards. If you pay with Apple Pay, you get 1% if you use your physical card, 2% if you tap to pay. The next foray is into BNPL, and so they can really tap the already this year 79 million customers who are going to use BNPL in the US and growing and bring them into the fold of Apple Pay, which then feeds the wallet's growth and makes it more usable, more of a replacement for physical wallets, and also can help broaden Apple's own financial services ambitions, which are vast.
And that is all we have time for. Thank you so much to my guests. I thank Jaime.
It was great to be here. Thanks, Marcus.
Thanks for hanging out. Thank you to Adriana.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you. And thanks to Todd, who is editing the show for us for the next couple of days. And thanks to everyone listening in. We'll see you tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Reimagining Retail, an e-marketer podcast made possible by marketing architects, where our very own Sarah Lebo is going to be talking with Susie David Canyon and Sky Canavis about resale and the circular economy.